Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Future of Retirement. I'm glad you're here. Today, I want to ask you a question that I think genuinely is fascinating. Have you ever met someone in their 80s who just seems a little different? Maybe they're a little sharper, more active, and genuinely enjoying life? Then you meet somebody else who's the exact same age who looks and feels 20 years older. Same birthday, radically different vibe. What's going on here with that? For decades, most of us assumed it was mostly genetics. You pick good parents, you won the lottery, end of story. But the most important part to me is, surprisingly, researchers have now tracked thousands of people from young adulthood all the way into their 90s, and what they found challenges almost everything we thought we knew about aging. The biggest predictor of whether you'll be thriving at 80 isn't your cholesterol level at 50. It's not how much money you have saved either. It's something entirely different, and I think it changes how we think about retirement. So anyway, there's this remarkable project called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Maybe you've heard of it. Since 1938, about 90 years ago, it's the longest running study of adult human life ever conducted. Researchers started by tracking 268 Harvard sophomores, and over time they added some inner city Boston residents and eventually wives and children of the original participants. Today, more than 1,300 people are still being followed across multiple generations. They've collected medical records, done brain scans, drawn blood, and conducted thousands of in-person interviews spanning decades. So after all that data, like nearly a century of it, the study's current director, psychiatrist named Robert Waldinger, summarized the single most important finding in one sentence. Here it is. People who were most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. Not the wealthiest, not the ones with the lowest cholesterol, the ones with the warmest connections in life. Think about it, right? Now here's where it gets really interesting. Waldinger and his team didn't just find the happy people have more friends. That's obvious. What they found is that relationship satisfaction at midlife actually predicts your physical health decades later. In the study, the men and the women who reported being the happiest in their marriages and closest to their friends and family at age 50 were dramatically less likely to develop chronic illnesses by age 80. They had lower heart rates, lower rates of heart disease, less cognitive decline, and even less physical pain. Here's another line from Waldinger that I think you should probably hear. Loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. Wow. I think that one of these statements that's easy to hear and it's easier to forget, because it's tempting to focus on the things we can measure, our 401k balance, our step count, our cholesterol numbers, and those things matter, of course, but this study is telling us something different. It's saying the quality of your relationships is a health metric, not just a happiness metric. The researchers even found that happily married 80-year-olds reported less physical pain on their worst days than unhappy married people did on their best days. Same aches and pains, but the emotional buffer of a good relationship changed how their bodies experienced it. There's a concept from Okinawa, Japan, which happens to be one of the places where people live the longest, healthiest lives on earth. It's called Ikigai, roughly translate to a reason for being, the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. And I think this is one of those ideas that sounds almost too simple to even matter, but the data is pretty compelling. In the blue zones, the regions around the world where people routinely live to be about 100, at remarkably low rates of dementia, heart disease, and cancer, they have a strong sense of purpose, and it's one of the 9 habits that every community shares. Here's what's interesting. Purpose in retirement doesn't have to be grand. It's not a cure cancer or write the next American novel. The research shows that it can be as simple as tending a garden, or mentoring a young person, volunteering a few hours a week, or being a grandparent who shows up reliably. What matters is there's something, some reason that makes tomorrow worth showing up for. Think about it. I've seen people here with modest savings who genuinely enjoy every single day. I've also seen a lot of wealthy retirees that seem to struggle because they've lost their sense of purpose. One of the biggest surprises in retirement, discovering that unlimited free time isn't always that enjoyable. Now, let me tell you about the physical habits, because research here is just as clear, and honestly, some of it surprised me. There's something I think we get wrong about exercise and aging. We picture the healthy 80-year-old as someone who was a marathon runner or a gym rat his whole life. That's not what the data actually shows. In the blue zones, nobody really exercises the way we think about it, at least most of them. They don't go to the gym, they don't run for the sake of running. Instead, movement is just woven into their daily life. They walk to a friend's house instead of driving. They garden, take the stairs, and go up and down from the floor regularly, which, by the way, is one of the strongest predictors of longevity. There's actually a test called the sit-to-stand test where researchers measure how easily someone can get up from sitting on the floor without using their hands. It's very predictive. The takeaway isn't that you need to become a fanatic at 65. The healthiest 80-year-olds have spent decades doing something, walking, gardening, chores, playing with grandkids, that kept them moving naturally and consistently throughout the day. Just 15 minutes of moderate activity a day is linked to measurable increases in lifespan. That's less than most of us spend scrolling on our phones, right? The dietary pattern across virtually every long-lived population is also remarkably consistent. I think the word pattern matters here because this isn't about a specific diet or magic superfood. The longest living people eat mostly plants, vegetables, beans, grains, nuts, and fruit. Meat is eaten sparingly, maybe once or twice a week, in portions that are much smaller than most Americans eat. Processed foods are almost non-existent in their diets. We know those are bad anyway. But there's another habit that I think is equally important and almost never talked about. In Okinawa, they have a practice called hare hachubu, which is eating until you're 80% full. They stop before they feel stuffed. Sound familiar? We do that all the time. I'm not suggesting you need to adopt an Okinawan diet, but the pattern is clear. Healthiest older adults consistently eat less than the average American, and what they eat is overwhelmingly plants. Stress is another thing. It's unavoidable, but every human being experiences it. The healthiest 80-year-olds have built-in routines that shed stress on a daily basis. For some, it's prayer or meditation. For others, it's an afternoon nap, something you see across the Mediterranean blue zones. For many, it's simply having a regular social rhythm with the same group of friends, the same weekly gatherings, same sense of belonging in a community. That last one, belonging, is something research keeps pointing back to. The Harvard study found that people who were part of a community, whether it was faith-based or just a tight circle of friends, consistently outlived and outthrived those who were isolated. So I think the lesson here is retirement shouldn't mean retreating, should mean reconnecting. Now, if you've been listening to all this and thinking, well, I wish I'd heard this 30 years ago, I've got some news for you that's genuinely encouraging. In March of 2026, researchers at the Yale School of Public Health published a study that challenges one of our deepest assumptions about aging, the idea that it's just a one-way street of decline. Their research found that 32% of adults actually improved their cognitive abilities over time. 28% improved physically as well. These weren't small changes either. Many of the gains exceeded thresholds that researchers considered clinically meaningful. In other words, Aging isn't just decline. For a significant number of people, it includes genuine improvement. And the people who improve tended to share the same habits that I'm describing: stay socially engaged, remain physically active, and they kept learning. I would much rather prepare for retirement that's longer than expected than discover I'm only planning for half of it. That's what the research shows, is preparing well isn't just about your financial side, it's about how you live day to day starting tomorrow. So let me bring this all together, because I think the research is actually pretty clear. The healthiest 80-year-olds, retirees, don't necessarily have better genes or more money. They tend to share the following: deep relationships they've invested in for decades, a reason to get up in the morning that has nothing to do with a paycheck, daily movement that's natural, not forced, a diet that's built around plants and not processed foods, and daily habits that manage stress, a community they belong to and keep learning. None of these requires a fortune. None of it requires extraordinary discipline either, really. What it requires, and this is the hard part, I guess, is consistency over decades. It's not about what you do in January or your retirement year. It's about what you've been doing every January for 30 years before that. And if you haven't been doing these things, the Yale study suggests you can still start. Your body and your brain are more adaptable than we've been led to believe. Retirement should be the beginning of the next chapter, not the end of your story. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these habits do you already practice? And which ones do you think would be the hardest for you to build? Your experience could help someone who's reading this and wondering where to start. Till next time, take care, stay curious, and keep planning for the future. Bye now.